Okay, so over Labor Day weekend, I was flipping through the channels and I came across a show called Siren. Now, why I didn't know about the show before, I don't know, because I mean, it is my kind of show. But, okay, so it takes place in a fishing town in Wisconsin. And that's pretty much their bread and butter. And so you have a rig that's out, it's late at night, and it's manned by Xander, his father, who I can't remember his name right now, Chris, and Calvin. And so they're out getting their late night catch, and they end up catching more than they bargained for. And so, they got their nets and emptied them out the whole nine, and they couldn't really tell because it was buried under a lot of fish, but it was moving around. They couldn't really figure out what was going on. And it moved fast as hell. So at this point, they never really saw what it was. And so in trying to defend itself, Chris ends up getting injured, and he ends up getting injured to the point where he has to be medevaced off the rig. So after Chris is injured, it kind of went into a container, and they sealed the container. So at this point, like I said, they still don't know what it was. And after they did that, they turned their attention to Chris, who was injured really bad. So the father, who's I guess the captain of that rig, he calls for help. And surprisingly, the military shows up and they medevac Chris off the ship, but they also took the container. And so, like I said, they're all kind of standing around trying to figure out what the hell just happened. And so the following day, they're having, I don't know if it's like a Founders Day fair or something like that. And the Powell family, apparently their time in that town goes way back. Like their great grandfather discovered that town. And so one of the things they were doing at this fair was unveiling the statue of him in honor of him. And so, that's when Ben Powell, that's when his father noticed, his father was up there giving this speech, and he noticed that Ben wasn't there. And so you find that, they go through the whole process and unveil the statue, and he kind of leads into his wife, trying to figure out why Ben wasn't there. And she's like, wasn't a whole lot to say. He just wasn't there. So you flash to Ben and Donna. The thing I like about this cast is that it is a very diverse cast. So that's a plus. So Ben and Donna are in a relationship. They're in a racial relationship. Donna is black. Ben is white. And so they are very kind of eco-friendly, save the world one animal at a time kind of people. And so he, instead of going to the event, he heard or got word of a seal that was injured. And so they actually went to retrieve the seal to treat his injuries, because their goal is to nurse these animals back to health so they can be released back into the water. And so, they come back and, they're having their little conversation like, your dad's going to be mad at you, and Ben could get less than a damn. He didn't want to be there anyway. And, Donna, so they part ways and they make plans to meet up later on. And so Ben ends up going to the local bar where he runs into Calvin, Xander, and Xander's father. And because Ben knows a lot about, I guess, I don't know, aquatic sea creatures or whatever, they're still kind of reeling, trying to figure out what happened. And so they told him about Chris being injured and the military taking their catch away, and they didn't know what it was. And, they're trying to explain to him to try to figure out what exactly it was. And he's like, so what do you think it was? And so they have like this, I don't want to say a statue, but like a carving of a mermaid. And he looked at him like, yeah, girl, you guys, you almost had me. So he just laughed it off like it was nothing. And the reason they think that is because there's a story behind their town about how when Charles Powell, Ben's, I guess, great grandfather, discovered that town, the story is he fell in love with the mermaid. Now, you know how these stories go, these small towns, which they have some truths, things get added along the way, things get taken away, and eventually it passes into like folklore and it becomes children's bedtime stories and the whole nine. So, So when they saw the sculpture of the mermaid, that's when he looked at the mermaid, and Ben was like, okay, well, it was nice talking to you, but no, I don't know what y'all talking about. And so you move to the military base, because when they medevac you, like I said, they took Chris and they took the container. And so you have scientists who were saying they've basically been tracking attacks, weird attacks. And so that's how they knew that something was going on, something was out there. And so he's talking to a military guy, and he's like, okay, so what does that all mean? So they walk into the room, and this is where you finally see what they actually caught. And it was a siren. And sirens, I have to say, they're not as, they don't look like Ariel, from that damn cartoon I can't think of right now, but the Little Mermaid. But they actually look kind of scary in their natural form. And so they have her in the container. If you can imagine, if you a child of the 80s and you can remember Splash with Daryl Hannah when she was a mermaid and they had her in that container, that's basically what she looks like. But the one that they have, she obviously is black, has black features and hair and the whole nine, sharp teeth, webbed fingers. The scales. It's a very interesting looking creature. And so when the military guy walked in, you could see he was just standing there with his mouth hanging over, because of course, how often do you get to see something like that? Okay, so it's later on the next day, and I said her name was Donna. Ben's girlfriend's name is Maddie. So Maddie and Ben are on the beach with a group of friends, just having a few beers, having a few laughs. And Ben noticed that Xander's off sitting by himself. So he walks over to talk to him. And it's really bothering him, because at this point, they still don't know where Chris is, where, these people took Chris. And the fact that they took their catch, it's really bothering him not knowing what's going on. And so Ben was basically like, I just don't believe. He didn't want to come out and say, okay, I don't believe you, but that's basically what their conversation was like. He said, so what is it going to take for you to believe me? He said, I would have to see it for myself. And so now Xander has in his head that they need to catch another one. And so while they're talking, you had this little boy who was out on one of those little boards. What he thought was a shark came up, but it was actually something had actually cut a shark in half. And so now they have the remains on the beach. And so Xander kind of gave him a look like, see, I told you something was out there. They kind of had that look. And so he's like, now Ben is like, he's not ready to believe that there's a mermaid out there, but his look was like, okay, well, maybe there's something out there. So later on that day, him and Maddie, they're back at, I guess, their office there on the water to try to examine like what could have cut this shark in half. And Ben's like, well, maybe there's a new predator out there. And so Maddie was like, maybe I need to cancel my scuba trip next week or something, she said. And so later that day, Ben is driving down the road, and a naked woman steps out into the road. She's kind of wobbly. She can't look like, she obviously looks disoriented. She's dirty. And so he jumps out to help her, and then she ends up collapsing. And he takes her back to his place and dresses her. And he's trying to communicate with her, trying to figure out what's going on, but she's kind of looking at him like she doesn't speak English and speak the language, like she doesn't understand what he's saying. And so he ends up calling the doctor to examine her. And so when the doctor gets there, by the time he goes to answer the door and get back, she's gone. So she woke up in some broke down, dilapidated boat that's in someone's backyard. And so she's just kind of walking around town, barefoot and dirty, looking for something. And at this point, you don't know what it is. And so she comes across the path of Helen Hawkins. Helen is the town eccentric. She has a little shop that sells like little trinkets and just a little bit of everything. And so they end up locking eyes, and it's like Helen knew what she was. Now I need to backtrack a little bit. When before the doctor showed up at Ben's place, she started to sing, and so that's how you know that she's a siren as well. And so she's a siren in her human, I guess you would say, form. When they come to land, they actually shed their skin almost like a snake. So their scales and everything, they shed that, and so they're able to walk amongst the town folk. And so what happens is when they shed their scales and their wing and their fins, what usually happens is that it dries out and crumbles. So it's like turns to dust or something. So eventually, there's no trace that they ever came to land. And so now she's kind of walking around town looking for something. And so while she was kind of standing there looking at Helen, Ben sees her, and by the time he gets out of his car to get across the street, she's already gone. And so you see now that she's down by the water, and she's kind of sniffing. She sees nets where the boats are. And so she finds the net that actually got her, I guess, a friend at this point. And she's able to tell that by the smell. And so when she sniffs the net, you can flash back. It gives you insight of what actually happened. So they were out swimming, and her friend ended up getting caught in the net. And that's how she got caught. And so now she is basically come to land to look for her friend. So you get a glimpse into kind of Maddie's situation. So she's preparing dinner for her father. And her father's actually the sheriff. And he, when he came in, he was talking about how Chris's parents, obviously they're worried sick because they have no idea what happened to them. They know that he was medevaced off the rig, but they haven't heard anything nobody knows where he is at this point. And so, they sit down to dinner, and her father says a prayer, and he makes a reference to her mom and saying, may, she find peace and whatever, may she find whatever, basically what she's looking for. And Maddie was like, it's been like 8 months since she left, so I think it's okay to drop her from our prayers. And her dad was like, she's on a journey. And so basically you get the feeling that she walked out on them. And so, earlier in the episode when her and Ben initially parted ways, she was like, I need to go home and make dinner for my father, because if I don't, he'll eat at the drive-thru all the time. And so I think she's kind of taking on that responsibility of caring for her father because her mom walked out. And you can tell that there's just, obviously, there's some resentment and anger. And I don't know if he wants to come to terms yet with the fact that she may not come back. So, that scene was, was pretty interesting. So you get a little insight into Maddie's family dynamic. And so Ren, I'm calling her Ren. Okay, so she is still, walking around town, still trying to find her friend. And so she comes up she steps on some glass. And she's very observant. And so she saw some boots that were out, some rain boots. She ended up putting the rain boots on. So while she did that, she saw there was a little boy in there, and he was watching some cartoon where the seahorse was like, I am Ren. And so that's where she got her name from. So that's what she started calling herself, Ren. And so she ends up coming across this guy from town. And she's continues to walk by, and he offers to give her a ride. But what he did was he drove deep into the woods, and he tried to rape her and said, this is where you find out not only can they change it to human form, that they're extremely strong, very strong. And so she ended up, I don't know if she cut his throat or bit his, ripped his throat out or something. I know his ass went flying through that windshield, and she got out and ran. And so she started scratching, she pulled her jacket off, and you can kind of see that her skin almost looks like a rash or something is going on with her. So she starts scratching her arm, and now she's like in a hurry to get to where she's trying to get. Okay, so Ren goes back to the rescue center, and at the time it was a school trip, and so you had a lot of young children there. And so Maddie was basically explaining what they do there, and they actually had some of the SEALs come up on the dock, and so they were able to see them. But as soon as Maddie came through the door, they started going crazy and started growling, and obviously started scaring the kids, and they're trying to figure out what is she. And so Maddie's saying, like, what is going on? Like, they've never done that before. And so the teacher kind of ushers the children away, like, well, you know what? Well, I think we've seen enough. Let's go on, because I ain't trying to deal with no lawsuit or no kid getting injured. So we just gonna go on and move on to our next stop on the trip. And so at that point, Ben got there, and he's kind of confused, like, what's going on? And then he looks over and he saw Ren. And so she went back into the rescue center. He went in, and at this point she's scared. You can see that her skin condition is getting worse. And so he put her at ease, and he was trying to. So he saw what looked like what we assume would be a rash or something that she has now on her neck, and the one on her arm got a lot worse. And so Maddie eventually walks in, and she's trying to figure out what is going on. And so he's explained to her what's going on, and said he's going to call the doctor. And she offered to stay, and he was like, "No, you need to go to your class. I'll just take care of this." And so while he was in there, I guess the medical part of the center, she, I guess, couldn't take it anymore, because I'm assuming that they're only allowed to be on land for a certain amount of time before their skin starts to dry out and they have to go back into the water. And so that was what was going on with her. So she ended up having to, she was to the point where she was so weak, she actually had to crawl. And then she kind of just fell into the water. And as soon as she hit the water, she started to change back into a siren. And so he didn't know. So he jumped in to help what he thought was to save her. But then he saw what was going on. And then she ends up attacking him and almost killed him. And so he manages to climb up on the dock. And he, at that point, passes out. Because, that fight on the water was something serious. And he luckily got away. And she went wherever she went, and that was basically how the first episode ended. So it's a very good show. It's my kind of show. Like, I'm still surprised that I didn't hear about it sooner, but I'm going to continue to watch, and I will come back with the next recap. So I'll talk to you guys later.